Hello, and welcome back to Read Becca for my weekly chatty catch-up on everything I read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading. First off, I'm not ignoring anyone's comments. I have been doing terribly at getting back to you all, though. Mainly I've just not been checking. I've not been checking anything, really, other than things I'm required. It's been one of those weeks, so I apologize that I am taking longer than usual to get back to people. So anyway, let's talk about my reading week. It was a good reading week, but I feel like I don't know where the week went, and I barely read. However, I did finish books, so that's really good. I first finished Timo the Adventurer, and this is written by Jonathan Garnier, illustrated by Johan Sacker, and translated from French by Laura Bernard. So you can see we have Timo and Broof over here. So Timo is a little boy who loves to read and loves heroic adventure stories. And one day he's reading a book, he goes home, and his parents have promised him that they're going to find him a new book to read, and they have scoured the village and cannot find a new book for him. And so what does he do? Naturally, he has to set off on his own adventure. So he does, and he encounters Broof here, trapped in a very mysterious temple, and he rescues him. Broof very grudgingly allows Timo to go along. Timo is very enthusiastic, and they have a heroic adventure, right? So that's the gist of the story, but there's so much to it in the telling, because Timo, because he is very bookish and loves these adventure stories, he's taking an adventurer's journal along the way, and so we get to see the pages as he is leaving his village for the first time. He's encountering a lot of new things, so he's literally recording the animals he encounters and naming them, because there's no one there to tell him what they're called. And so he's collecting all this information, and pretty obviously, I think, as it comes around to the end, he has written a book, basically. He turns this into his own adventure story that then he's able to share. But it's not just that. There is so much to this about there not being a sense of heroism and not being a true heroic sense of good and evil. Toward the end, it concludes, what I've learned from all this is you have to put yourself in someone else's shoes to understand them and not judge them too quickly. I also learned that holding a sword or having big muscles doesn't make you a hero. So I love that this came around to having those discoveries, because he encounters a lot of people he thinks maybe are good or maybe are bad, and then preconceptions are challenged along the way. And I love that. I love the art as well. The art is just really unique because these animals are very creative. They look a little like standard animals, but obviously, Broof would be somewhat like a red panda maybe, but not quite. They have a very distinct style for sure. So I love that. I love all the nature scenes, and I love his journal. His journal is in kind of sepia tones, and they clearly are like children's drawings. So I think that meshes together really well. So this is obviously a children's graphic novel, and I don't expect the density of storytelling. It's very short, but I think it packed a good amount of story and nuance into this short package for a kid to read. So I very much enjoyed this one. Then I read American Idolatry by Andrew L. Whitehead. This is the second book on the topic of white Christian nationalism in America that I have read this year, that has come out within this year-ish. And both of the books are quite short. Both are kind of primers on the topic, but they take very, very different approaches. And I like that this one, he actually specifically references the other book that I read, The Flag and the Cross. And he talks about not wanting to kind of what was done there, where that book is very introductory, but takes kind of a more academic approach. It's really about the research, the statistics surrounding behaviors and perceptions of white Christian nationalists. And this is much more looking at it from the soft side, I guess. There's a lot of citation here. It is about the same topics, but this is much more assessing the psyche of a white Christian nationalist, the background and history that goes into someone gaining that ideology, and then rebutting. And I think that rebuttal is the majority of this book, but it's not doing it from a science basis, it's doing it from a biblical basis. So this is much more about appeal to emotion for that person. So this is just a niche topic that I really enjoy reading about, and I think this is a great book to get into someone's hands who is having conversations with a white Christian nationalist. Do I think that the actual white Christian nationalists would read this? Probably not. I don't think they would get past the beginning. And that was maybe my one falter to this. So the author seems to be still a Christian currently, and discusses having grown up very strongly evangelical, and seems to have loosened up a bit from there. But it sounds like he is also still, or considers himself to be within evangelical belief, even though a lot of the things he espouses I've never seen in an evangelical sect. So that is interesting to me. Maybe he has come away, or he has found a sect I'm not aware of that has these views, or he just still identifies with that because of his background, and he feels a connection to that particular group. So I don't know where he's at with his own Christianity, but because of that background, near the beginning, he starts out by kind of no true Scotsmaning these evangelical, mostly white Christian nationalists. And I think that undercuts a lot of what he's trying to do by saying, well, they're not really following what Christ says, they maybe don't really fit as Christians, and yet he is self-aware enough to come back around and say, well, yeah, if you talk to the founding fathers, anyone in modern Christianity would probably not be a Christian. Things like that, where he's self-aware that there isn't a defining characteristic of a Christian beyond claiming that you're a Christian. There's no set rules for what you have to do to be a Christian. And every single denomination will claim that's why we have thousands of denominations, because everyone claims the other denominations aren't quite following it right? So I think had it skipped over that little bit and just gone straight into the discussion of what did Jesus actually say on these topics. Like, that is the bulk of the book, and I think he could have just jumped into that and really made a more effective point. So that was the one falter for me. As far as the actual points that he's making, I think they were really well laid out, and they were mainly things I knew already, but the framing here was fantastic. I think he collected things together in ways that are fresh for me in terms of trying to get across a point. So what is he talking about? The main thing is the idolatry. He is taking the topics of power, fear, and violence as these sort of pillars of white Christian nationalism that are very much countered by the words of Christ himself within the Gospels primarily, right? And so he does go through a very clear, detailed breakdown and talking about what does Christ actually call his followers to do on these topics, and just how at odds are the behaviors and ideologies of white Christian nationalism in those areas. And he's treating those as idols that they have over Christ's message. And so I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. I also really like how he laid out those topics and rebutted them from Christ's own words, really. The way he combined things together was great. So looking at fear, even at the most basic level, you have just rampant fear within Christian nationalists right now about anything that's different or anything that's other, outside the us versus them in group, rather than Christ's message was really everyone is part of your in group, right? But he also preached so much love, about perfect love drives out fear, about loving your neighbor, and all of that was specifically in service of loving the stranger and the foreigner. That was a very strong message throughout Christ's teaching. In terms of the violence and power aspects, he talks through in a really nuanced way the aspects of very specific discussions in the Gospels that Christ had both with Pontius Pilate, a leader, and with his own followers about the idea of not having this earthly kingdom, about being separate from any nation that you are living in, but respecting the laws and customs, about not trying to overthrow and take power and push the message or attempt to create a nation of your desires, because on earth this is not where your nation is. So I think that working through all of that in this was done really easy to consume and really easy to, I think, discuss with someone. So I really, really liked that. There were so many important things to take away just in small bits here. You're more likely to be physically harmed by someone who claims to be a Christian than who is an immigrant, illegal or legal. Things from the history of the evangelical movement that has grown into what this is today, where, like for me, I grew up homeschooled and I grew up with Bob Jones branded curriculum and Bob Jones University is a really major player in Christian schooling. And I had no idea, I had never known that Bob Jones himself was very white supremacist and vocally anti-desegregation. So all of those things in that ideology make their way into documents and teachings that he had power to spread. There was another, I can't remember who the individual was, but it was a prominent figure, penned an article for American Conservative and wrote about the subjugation of indigenous peoples and residential schools and the harms and deaths of those things to assimilate them to American white culture. And the horrible thing is that he effectively was writing that all of that was okay and for the greater good, despite all of the harms done, because we assimilated them to white American culture. And to see those things laid out on the page together alongside words of Christ that are directly counter is very difficult to read and jarring to see. But at the same time, reading it, it looks so clear, so black and white on the page reading this, and yet at the same time, I have to be aware that the person that this is talking about is reading the Bible in a different way. They are picking and choosing other verses that have meaning to them and interpreting them in different ways. And, you know, unfortunately, there isn't a consensus on how to interpret the Bible because everyone is finding their own meaning very much. And that's the hard part with something like this, where it does look so clear-cut when it's laid out here in this book, but it's just not that clear-cut in reality. So overall, I think this gave a lot of great tools for framing conversations on these topics with someone who holds that ideology, and it put together some ideas from Christ's own words that I wouldn't have necessarily put together or grouped together before, even though they do make logical sense to do so. And so I feel like that added to my toolkit. So this is always a topic that I'm interested in learning more about. So I'm very glad I picked this one up. I think it is short, condensed, and very easy to get through and pull some information out of. Finally, I read Leech by Hiram Ennis. This one I did not expect to like. I saw this cover when it came out. It came out in 2022, and it was popular, I think, around more horror readers, and then it kind of died off, and then it started coming back. But the first time around, I just dismissed it. I was like, that is not a book for me. I saw the cover and was like, nope, I'm out. And then all of a sudden, the past maybe 2 months, people have been picking it up again, I think, around for spooky season, right? And all of a sudden, I heard a couple different people talk about it that sold me on, maybe I need to change my mind here and give it a shot. Number one was that the audiobook was narrated by Abigail Thorne, who is the host of Philosophy Tube channel. So love Abigail. She is a wonderful, delightful person. I love everything about the topics that she covers, and her presentation does seem like it would be very perfect for this. She has like British thespian voice, and it is great. It does really, really work for this. The other thing that was talked about, there were multiple things, but I can't remember anything except for one part, and that was that the protagonist is a hive mind, and that's catnip for me. I love that. And that is the case, and it's a really, really great perspective. So when this came out, this was actually in the Goodreads Choice Awards in the sci-fi category, and that makes no sense to me. This is totally like gothic horror, and actually on the back there is a perfect blurb from Peter Watts. If you've ever wondered what would happen if David Cronenberg and Edgar Allan Poe bumped into each other at the same parasitological conference, here's your answer. That is dead spot on. Completely perfect description for this. And especially, like, it's weird because I'm working through a complete read of Edgar Allan Poe's work. Like, Poe keeps coming up all over the place, and I guess, you know, maybe I just don't notice it usually, but Poe keeps coming up, and this has that very darkly romantic type of writing that Poe uses. And that was, like, aspect number one, was the joint of Abigail Thorne's voice with the prose of this. The dripping, lush prose was so fabulous. It really, it is a gothic work in that there's a lot that's not solid about it. But that is the selling point, I think, for this. So I haven't even talked about what the book is, but the selling point is if you like gothic works, if you like that dark romanticism, and you can handle a little body horror, like, this is a place to go. As well, I actually saw one of my friends describe this as Vandemirian, like Jeff Vandermeer. This is not surreal to that level quite, but absolutely, I couldn't see it at first. But by the end, completely. If Jeff Vandermeer wrote a Gothic novel, it would be like this, I think. So if those are like keywords that sound interesting to you, get into this for sure. So what is the book about? I don't want to go too much. I'm going to stick kind of around what's talked about in the synopsis that's published. But so this, as I said, in Goodreads Choice Awards a couple of years ago, it was put in sci-fi. It is post-apocalyptic. We don't know really, it's Gothic, so everything is kind of shadowy. The things that are close to what's happening are well fleshed out and clear, but everything else, the wider world building, the backstories, are all kind of shadowy and intangible. So you don't come out of this with really good, clear answers about how everything works, but you get enough that is really intriguing. So we are following our hive mind character, the Doctor, as they are going to a remote chateau. And in this world, it seems there is a long winter type situation. There's a lot of snow, and we're heading to this remote chateau and getting snowed in effectively. So it's very isolated, very atmospheric, and I loved that part about this. In the kind of background, you can tell that has come from somewhere, but not entirely. Like what specifically happened. We know there are these monsters. Like they're not prominent to this. They just exist in this world. They're not a big part of the story or the scary part. But like blizzards follow these monsters, and so there is some sort of weird like weather conjoint element. There's a lot about hot and cold temperatures with people. But our hive mind, the Doctor, is going to this chateau to sort of replace or step in for the previous Doctor who has died. And we don't really know why or what's going on. And it's so interesting because the Doctor is really only known as the Doctor. But the Doctor, as they are closer and farther away from their host bodies, or other host bodies, I guess, they sort of have tenuous connection to one another. So the hive mind is not 100% connected, but does have an awareness of what has gone on in this house. And it's like almost subconscious rather than conscious, if that makes sense. So they don't know what has gone wrong exactly, and they're trying to figure that out. We know from the synopsis that there is a major element to this that is because our hive mind is made up of a pathogen, a pathogenic infectious disease, basically, is what this hive mind is. There is another pathogen that is rising, some sort of parasite. And this becomes somewhat of, not a battle of wits, but a battle of wills between the idea of two parasites and how much of our world is parasitic, not just things that are tangible, just even things like gut bacteria or germs. And it's so interesting to look at things from that perspective. So I love the POV for this because of that, because it gives us such a different viewpoint. And I think it worked so well for me because this is quite a body horror heavy book, that our hive mind is inhuman. So we have a distance drawn in there because they're not looking at things from a human perspective. They're not attaching emotion to a lot of really horrific things that are happening. And they're also a doctor. So there's an added distance because of that, because they're looking at things from a clinical perspective rather than, again, getting emotional about what's going on when people are really horribly injured. So there is quite a lot of body horror, but none of it got to me, which is really weird. That was a very strange experience. And, going back to last week, I was talking a lot about horror and how it's been affecting me differently, or I've been a lot more open to horrific things than usual. And again, this I feel like should have been way over my line. So I don't know if it's that perspective or if I just was okay with a lot of really gross stuff. I don't know. But oh man. So I want to just gush and be like, oh my God, I loved this. This was amazing. And I feel mostly that way. Like there were so many moments of reading this. I had the audiobook and then I went and got the print book because I wanted to hybrid read it because I wanted to be so immersed in it. And there were so many points where I just didn't want to set down the book. But then there was a lot of other moments of like, this is really long and slow and plotting. It's very gothic. So there's not a lot of action. There are moments where it feels drawn out, and this is only 300 pages, but it's a 13-hour audiobook somehow. So it does feel very extended, and there were moments where that time you really felt it, where it could have been cut, or there were scenes that I don't know what it was adding other than maybe beauty of the prose. There was a lot to that. As we get toward the end, that increased, I think. So I feel like it maybe could have been edited more toward the end, but there was so much to this to love. Like I got so behind what was going on, even though I don't really feel like I have a full understanding. I feel like there is a passage from this that I happened to tab, and in the end of this book, because it being Gothic, we don't get a wrapped up shiny bow on top conclusion to this. And I think this passage from the book is a foreshadowing for us of exactly that, of you may not be totally satisfied here in the end, but I think it's perfect. So I'm going to close out on this one with this little passage here.
The oldest of all priests' ancient tales is that of a nameless Montish boy. He lived back when the ashes of the world's great catastrophes were fresh and warm, when life was easy. Those were the days before people needed to stuff their blankets and clothes with dog fur, when one could walk alone on a winter night, and the Ventago were nothing more than tall, clement elk. Only such a time of plenty could have produced a boy with such unwarranted happiness. His heart was so bright with hope and love that it could not be contained within him, so instead it manifested as a torch, which he carried with him wherever he went. At night, he left it in a sconce on the wall. In the day, he held it in one hand, always nurturing its flame, never allowing it to flicker out. Every morning, he would descend into the caves to search for precious stones, since those were also the days when the mines were abundant and obedient. But the sleeping mountains were waking up again, and through the widening cracks came the quakes and gaseous leaks, the poison cave grasses, and the living shadows who gorged themselves on jade and wheat rock. When these beings laid eyes on the boy and his torch, they were both disgusted and intrigued. They hated his warmth, yet they envied it. They were afraid of his light, yet they followed it wherever he went. Jealous of his goodness, the shadows stalked him through the caverns, conspiring to swallow his heart, to snuff out its flame, to separate his soul from his body and devour him entirely. Yes, so they did. Priest always finishes. The first time I heard the story, I had expected a more cohesive narrative. I had expected a confrontation of some sort, a game of wits, a battle between the boy and the devils that lived in the darkness under the mountain. I was taken aback by the abruptness of our hero's end. Name lost to the ages, but ignoble death preserved in memory. That was before I learned all Montish stories ended that way.
That is everything that I read this week. Everything I'm currently reading is Distant Gardens, the anthology. I have one story left, but it is the longest one. So that is going to be my priority to get done either later today or tomorrow. I'm going to finish that out. And Empress of Forever, I've got about 100 pages left on this one. Slowly but surely. I started Nonfiction November, priority number 1, The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Kolbert. I borrowed this from the library before and knew I needed my own copy, and then I never started it when I got it back. So I read the first chapter, which was what I had read before from the library, and I'm going to make progress on it. Then I had a pre-order out for Josiah Bancroft's new book, The Hexologists, and so I absolutely have to start this and read this week, or I will lose it from the library. It's very short, so I think easy enough to get through in the next week, I hope. And then that will put me right up against November reading, I think. I do have one other on ebook. I'm reading Morkster Chef Cleaver's Edge. A brilliant, fun time. It's fantasy lit RPG with cooking elements. Super fun. So I think that is it for reading stuff. I did kind of continue on with horror-y stuff through the end of October at least. Obviously with Leech, I was still reading that. I watched The Menu, which is exactly my sort of horror. Very little gruesome stuff actually happens. It's much more about like this tension that is built and held, like maintained through the whole movie. There definitely is some gruesome stuff, but like I would not say there's anything in that movie that is more graphic or more gruesome than the average action movie, for sure, and there's very little action in it. The first kind of shocking thing that happens I would say you probably need to check trigger warnings for it if you have any triggers, because it is very, very shocking and emotional probably for some people. But as far as like the graphicness of it, it's really fast, like not very exposed on the screen or anything. There's not a whole lot of like blood or gore or anything throughout the film. It's much more about how unsettling everything is. And it's doing all of this stuff, the tension and the shocking things that are happening, in service every time of actually making a commentary on something. And that's like Parasite. I think Parasite would be a great comparison for this, where that one, like 90% of the movie is very mundane, and then there are these brief moments of really shocking things that happen. And it's kind of the same way. So I really enjoyed that one. I kind of predictably knew that was going to be a real hit for me, or was a pretty solid bet, and so I had saved it for Halloween specifically. And then I rewatched a horror movie. I rarely rewatch anything, so that was an outlier, but I had been thinking about it especially after I watched The Menu. It is in that kind of similar vein where it's very mundane. It's a very small cast, almost entirely single location, and really all about performances. And it is maintaining a very quiet story so that when you get those shocks, they're impactful. And actually, this one is definitely more gory, but most of it takes place off screen. So you will see like splashes of blood and stuff like that off the screen, and you like the thing that's unsettling is knowing what's happening and having the awareness, not as much or less what's actually gruesome. But it's all in service of really fantastic social commentary. And so I enjoyed that one very, very much. Sebastian Stan and Daisy Edgar Jones are amazing performances in that movie. So I just really enjoyed rewatching that one. So I think that's it for watching stuff. I have a bunch of stuff on the go currently, but very slow going. But life stuff, I don't have a ton to update on. It was a really hectic week. Work just kind of dominated my week, and yeah, it was very, very long days. And I think Wednesday I worked till 9:30 at night and just didn't feel like reading at all after that. I just basically watched a show and then went to bed. So it was a very stressful week. Lots going on this weekend. Busy with both fun stuff and not fun stuff. But all around okay. My energy level is super duper low after my work week though. I think that is pretty much it. Daylight savings this weekend, which always throws a wrench into things, especially because cats do not believe in daylight savings. And I really don't either. I wish it would just go away, honestly. But it keeps happening. And that does tend to affect my work as well. Because of technology. We run on GMT, but it's very, very critical that we have adjustments on our systems that they understand local times all over the world. So that always throws a wrench into things. Yeah, so I think that's it for my week. I will hopefully have better, more fun stuff to talk about next week, because I'm doing some fun stuff this weekend, and next week I'm diving in after next weekend to a week off. So hopefully I will get a boost and a burst for November reading, and next week is mid-month book bash weekend. So I will I missed last month, but I will probably commit to doing a read a book in a day on Saturday for mid-month book bash and vlog it. So that should be fun, and hopefully I will find some fun stuff to do. So I think that's it for me. Again, as I said up front, I apologize for being very behind on getting back to people, but I'm not like purposely ignoring anyone. I just haven't been getting around to comments at all, and I'm so behind on watching people's videos. So I will eventually get to that. So that is it for me today. Thank you so very much for watching.